This is You've Already Been Hacked, recorded on 13 March 2021. Welcome to the Ides of March. For those that don't know, a little background on that. The Ides of March is the 74th day of the Roman calendar, which generally corresponds to the 15th of March. It was marked by several religious observances and was notable for the Romans as the deadline for settling debts. 44 BC is when it really became a thing, though, as that's the date of the assassination of Julius Caesar, which one could say maybe is slowly happening in cybersecurity across the world. So let's get into it. Looks like the 2021 version of a nightmare has already begun. Over 30,000 Exchange servers have been hacked. On Monday, the 8th of March, Microsoft released patches for older unsupported versions of Microsoft Exchange to protect entities using those versions from attacks. And that's just for the older unsupported versions of Exchange. So what's going on? Well, Microsoft has released updates to address more than 80 vulnerabilities in Windows, Edge, Azure, Office, and other products. Several of these vulnerabilities are being actively exploited, including a memory corruption issue inside of Internet Explorer that was used in attacks targeting security researchers. The flaw can be exploited to gain privileges equivalent to those of the user logged in. However, it gets worse. According to ESET, at least 10 advanced persistent threat groups are exploiting Microsoft Exchange Server vulnerabilities. Many of these groups, according to ESET, have ties to China. 6 of those groups were actively exploiting the flaws prior to Microsoft's emergency patch release on Tuesday, the 2nd of March. Now, the timeline of events on this looks a little bit, I won't say weird, but it's complicated. It looks like Microsoft knew of something related to these vulnerabilities at least as far back as the 5th of January, when a group called DevCore alerted Microsoft of its findings. And as we walk forward from there, other groups started to notice things that were, I won't say adjacent, but definitely related, but didn't have yet the full picture, right? So Trend Micro published something on the 29th of January. Velocity warned Microsoft on the 2nd of January. Microsoft then started to issue and publish escalating problems that they saw. By the end of February, it looks like these groups started to do global mass scans, not the good guys, the bad guys. And the attackers started to rapidly backdoor vulnerabilities in these servers. By the 3rd of March, tens of thousands of Exchange servers were compromised worldwide, with thousands more servers getting freshly hacked per hour. On the 5th of March, Curbs on Security broke news that at least 30,000 organizations in the United States and hundreds of thousands worldwide now have backdoors installed due to the Exchange vulnerability, and that was confirmed later that day by Wired.com, so 2 independent media outlets reporting the same information. Then the U.S. government's CISA also confirmed that these vulnerabilities were out there and that the problem was widespread, even so much so as the former CISA head Chris Curbs tweeting out that the real victim number dwarfs what has been reported publicly. And here we are on the 13th of March, and we know that stage 2 attacks are happening, which is the pivot of an APT into deeper parts of these compromised networks. Patches have been issued, updates are occurring, so this rolling nightmare continues. What's interesting about this is we thought SolarWinds was this horrific nightmare, and it is, right? The reported number on that was 18,000 plus organizations. Well, This hack, as I said, is publicly 30,000 just in the US and potentially hundreds of thousands worldwide. So we're talking a nightmare of exponential scale by comparison. In very much the same tone as the response to SolarWinds, the U.S. Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency has issued another emergency directive instructing federal civilian departments and agencies to apply the emergency patches to their Exchange servers or disconnect those vulnerable systems from the internet. From the telemetry acquired by security researchers, they have identified an array of affected victims, including US-based retailers, local level governments, universities, engineering firms, a Southeast Asian government, and a Central Asian telecom at just the bare minimum. So let's talk a little bit about what we're seeing in this in this hack and how it's working. Well, they're inside of Exchange in some of the technical stuff. In the net group, the Exchange organization administrators under administrator/del/domain. This is where the command attempts to delete the administrative user from the Exchange organization's admin group, beginning with the domain controller in the current domain. And if the system is a single system domain, it will execute on that local computer. Microsoft, in a recent blog post, has identified additional post-exploitation activities, including credential theft via dumping the LSASS process memory, compression of data from exfiltration via 7-zip, the use of Exchange PowerShell snap-ins to export mailbox data, and the use of additional offensive security tools called Covenant, Nishana, and PowerCat for remote access. And all of this, as we said, is indicative of these groups not only pilfering all the data off the Exchange servers, right? So they're just mass harvesting these mailboxes, and they're going to probably go through that at some point to see if there's anything of value. But what they're really doing is, once again, they're using the porousness, whether required or not, of networks to gain access, to get that foothold so that they can then pivot in and go looking for whatever it is they're really interested in. Or they're just going to scrape everything they can off of every network they get into and take the time later, do the research, and extract value out of all of these potentially terabytes, petabytes, yottabytes, who knows how much data is going to be extracted from this, and find something that is worth the energy and effort that has value. From where I sit, while SolarWinds is horrific, I'm not even going to talk about it at all this week. This is far more pervasive, far worse, and yet another story of cyber risk that is simply not going to go away. And not with this size and scale, not with how prolific Microsoft products are in the work environment, and that is not a negative, right? The proliferation of these technologies is what's allowed us to have the ubiquity we do. So I'm not suggesting that everyone should just dump Exchange and move on. No, work has to be done. What I am suggesting, though, is because of the pervasiveness of that technology, this vulnerability impacts potentially almost everyone that is connected to the internet. Now, I say almost everyone. Yes, there are plenty of other mail servers out there and different things on the back end, but we're talking about the size and scale. And if we're in the hundreds of thousands of organizations, potentially anyone that has some sort of mail exchange could either be a target or a vector for infection or something of that in some sort of related way moving forward. Because there is no way that every single one of the organizations that has this impact, or even potentially impacted, is going to do these updates in a timely manner. It just will not happen. The statistics and the probability on that just do not align. So this is going to be something that is pervasive throughout most of 2021, if not beyond that. And we'll just keep monitoring it as it goes on. Oh, and one more note. The exploits for this particular uh, vulnerability in Exchange, in a form of poetic irony, have been posted to GitHub. And for those that are unaware or may have forgotten, GitHub is owned by Microsoft. Now, most weeks, I'd like to end with a positive news story, a little hope in cybersecurity. And I looked this week, everybody, I looked far and wide. I didn't find much hope out there. I found just more and more bad. So, in the only other story we'll talk about this week, Verkada surveillance cameras have been breached. Live feeds from more than 150,000 Verkada surveillance cameras were breached after administrative account credentials were found on the internet. It also seems like in this potential incident, the attackers were able to access archive footage as well. To Verkada's credit, they have disabled all internal administrative accounts, and effective organizations include hospitals, prisons, schools, police stations, and manufacturing facilities. Two standouts in those that have had their cameras compromised include Tesla and Cloudflare. How many cameras in some of these places? Well, like we said, it's 150,000 worldwide, but inside of Tesla, the hackers claim to have 222 cameras in their factories and warehouses. There's some dispute over the warehouse in Shanghai. Tesla said it was not breached. The hackers say it was. There is news coming out of Bloomberg that the cameras inside of the Florida Hospital Halifax Health Facility showed what appeared to be staff tackling a man and pinning him to a bed. There looks to be footage from 330 security cameras inside the Madison County Jail System in Huntsville, Alabama. And the hackers claim that they were able to access live feeds and archive footage there, and in some cases, including audio of interviews between police officers and criminal suspects, all in the high definition resolution from the cameras at 4K. It also looks like Verkada's own cameras in their facilities were also compromised. And what super criminal expertise was needed for this 150,000 camera hack? Not much. It's very, very unsophisticated. The hackers gained access through a super admin account. And by having those credentials, it allowed them to peer into the cameras of all of Verkada's customers. According to researchers, they found a username and password for administrator account publicly exposed on the internet. If you want to look at this with any sort of silver lining, the only net positive that comes from any of this is that it exposes really just how widely we are being surveilled, and really how, we'll say, much minimal care is put into securing those surveillance platforms. Now, again, to Verkada's credit, they have disabled all internal administrator passwords. They're likely to be changing all of that and hopefully re-educating their IT staff and security people to have better cyber hygiene. So hopefully this won't happen again. But again, with such a size and scale of a compromise, one hopes that all of those cameras will receive whatever propagated update is necessary so that they are all secured again. I'm going to err on the side of that may not happen, only because of scale, network connectivity, etc., etc. That's all for the news this week. I'm your professor of cyber risk. We'll talk again soon. If you like this podcast, share it with your colleagues and friends. Your support is how we are able to continue to make this content. Thank you. That's all for the news this week. I'm your professor of cyber risk. We'll talk again soon. If you like this podcast, share it with your colleagues and friends. Your support is how we are able to continue to make this content. Thank you.